Trump has declared a new golden age for America and that America's decline is over. His inauguration speech filled me with horror. Jon Stewart quipped that the inauguration represented the peaceful transfer of power to the guy who tried to overthrow the previous peaceful transfer of power. All the while, Biden, of course, pardoned his family. Trump is surrounded by like-minded far-right followers, and as a movement, they are determined to carry out attacks on the most vulnerable people. He got repeated standing ovations for his disgusting rhetoric targeting migrants and gender-diverse people and condemning radical ideas, by which he meant diversity, equity and inclusion policies. There's a key phrase a lot of commentators have overlooked in his inauguration speech, that Trump said that he has learned a lot along the way on the journey to reclaim our republic. He has learned the use of executive power and to surround himself with people who can be trusted to carry out his work. The new ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, is a Christian Zionist who said there's no such thing as a settlement and there's really no such thing as a Palestinian. His border czar, Tom Homan, said he will run the biggest deportation force this country has ever seen. Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller suggested that drones should be used to sink asylum seeker boats and promotes the racist Great Replacement theory. Secretary of Defence Pete Hegseth has neo-Nazi tattoos on his chest and condemned war crimes regulations as rules written for us to lose. He wants to overturn woke rules such as women in combat roles. Marco Rubio, for Secretary of State, supports Trump's plans for a much more aggressive stance towards China. Trump has tied his administration to billionaires, most notoriously Elon Musk, who gave a Nazi salute at the inauguration. There are 13 billionaires in his cabinet. 6 people present at his inauguration, Musk, Bezos, Zuckerberg, Apple CEO Tim Cook, Google CEO Sundar Pichai and TikTok CEO Zhu Xi, own 20% of the world's wealth between them and completely dominate the internet and social media. Trump has already signed horrific executive orders and spoke to them in his inauguration speech. He's declared a national emergency at the Mexican border and sending troops, for which he got a standing ovation, after racist fear-mongering that illegal migrants are dangerous criminals and people from mental institutions. He's blocking all immigration and starting a deportation campaign. He wants to deport 11 million people, and he's serious. He's removing citizenship as a birthright for some families, that is, immigrant families. He's evoked the Enemy Aliens Act of 1798 against foreign gangs in cities. His plan to defeat inflation is to drill, baby, drill. That is, he wants to expand the exploitation of America's own energy resources in oil and gas to reduce energy costs, and this is related to his withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement. He also wants to end the Green New Deal and revoke the electric vehicle mandate. These measures are especially frightening in the context of the California fires. In his previous administration, Trump refused funding to California for fighting the fires and now blames the lesbian fire chief for the disaster rather than the $80 million that California cut to its fire services. He has frozen hiring of public servants, withdrawn the USA from the World Health Organization, and taken down the US government website providing information about abortion and birth control. He's imposed huge tariffs on imports, which he characterised as a tax on foreign companies and the new External Revenue Service. He's mandated that there are only 2 genders, male and female. He got another standing ovation for that at the inauguration. It has been pointed out online to much laughter that he's defined gender as what was assigned from conception because he is trying to unite opposition to abortion with opposition to gender diversity. But the complication being all human beings are female at conception. The funny situation of this doesn't actually change the grim reality that what he wants is for trans people and non-binary people to not exist. So how do we get here? While Trump promised to make America great again, the Democrats could only respond, America's already great. This was a slap in the face to the millions of working class people who are working 2 jobs just to make rent and can be bankrupted by predictable health crises. Workers in the USA have also been hit hard by inflation. Prices have risen 19.4% in the last 4 years of the Biden administration, a crucial issue for the 60% of Americans who live paycheck to paycheck. Trump, on the other hand, addressed working class suffering. 93% of Trump voters rated the economy as a very important or the most important issue in the election, and a majority of Americans said they were more worse off than 4 years ago. His promises for tariffs are intended to appeal to the idea of protecting American jobs from overseas competition, and he kept talking about the economy. However, at the same time, he kept up the racism. This was crucial for him, because if Trump simply talked about the economic crisis, people might draw the conclusion that billionaires are to blame rather than immigrants. He clearly tied economic discontent to scaremongering about immigrants. His repeated mantra, I will protect our jobs, I will protect our borders. Working class voters, including some black and Hispanic voters, punished the Democrats for their ongoing management of the economy on behalf of the rich. Note, however, 36% of the electorate did not vote at all. This actually beat Trump, for whom he won 31% of the total electorate, and Harris won about 30% of the total electorate. So the actual verdict of the electorate was that the election was not relevant for them, or, in many cases, they were disenfranchised. Women voters were 53% in favour of Harris over Trump. This was less than the female vote that Biden won in the previous election. This despite Harris's big push on abortion rights in the wake of the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe versus Wade. The Democrats retreated on confrontations about immigration. Harris accused Trump of scuttling a bipartisan border security bill for political reasons. The Democrats made no principled defence of migration, conceding immigration as a problem. When Trump campaigned on the slogan, Kamala is for they, them, President Trump is for you, the Democrats retreated. They did not include any trans speakers at their convention, and Harris evaded questions about gender-affirming care. Some Democrats in that context still argued that the Democrat Party is too woke, that it should have talked more about the economy. I agree with that, and less about rights. I disagree with that. The answer is not to pit workers against each other. The answer is not to pit workers' rights against identity politics, but to address a multicultural and gender-diverse working class to cut through Trump's divisive rhetoric. All of this has happened against the background of the USA's genocide of the Palestinian people using their handy tool Israel. This has led to a magnificent rise in the struggle for Palestine in the USA, like in Australia, but the Democrats were unmoved in their policies. This led to an uncommitted movement centred on Arab and Muslim voters, whose leadership accepted money from the Democrats shamefully to shut up. But in one city in Michigan, Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, got 18% of the vote, beating the Democrats' vote. Activists were and are rightly sickened by Harris and Biden's funding and support for the genocide of the Palestinian people. So the possibilities of resistance. At the same time as voting for Trump, there were successful votes for progressive measures. 7 out of 10 states passed enhanced abortion rights, although less than the 9 or 10 out of 10 normally expected. In the context of the success of the Supreme Court overturning abortion rights, this was a significant reality check for the evangelical right. Other Republican states approved raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour. That's up from $7.25 in some states. They mandated sick leave and voted down a schools voucher system backed by the religious right, and voted down proposed limits to voting rights. while voting Trump in many cases. Progressive ideas were present in this election, but the Democrats could not connect with them. It's not a matter of, this is a matter of their core politics. It's not a matter of some tactical error on their part. My Facebook feed, which is mostly meme groups that have turned into social support groups for gender diverse and neurodiverse people, is filled with a fear of the Trump administration. Trans people are talking about buying guns and migrating to be near the Canada border so they can make a run for it. Police racism against black people is ongoing and unchecked, and undocumented migrants are cowering in fear of their doors being kicked open and separated from their children. ABC News today reports that the community of El Paso, Juarez, on the USA-Mexican border, operates as one community across the border, and there are many family ties between both halves of that city. This community is now bracing for the impact of troops arriving and the no new immigrant policy. There is no question of the real fear that the Trump administration is now generating. My social media feed is also full of people declaring Trump to be a fascist dictator. They point to his utterly repugnant sexism, racism and homophobia and his clear agenda to rule for the rich. There is no question he is an authoritarian, and there is also no question he has made it easier for fascists to organise. But Trump has relied upon the democratic institutions of the USA to gain power, unlike Hitler and Mussolini, who both came to power via executive fiat or armed struggle. The danger of fascism is real in the USA, but they are not a fascist state yet. There are other takes that I think are going around that are mistaken. Norman Finkelstein, the Jewish academic who has spoken out against the genocide of the Palestinians, has argued that Trump's administration is not fascist because you only need fascism where there is an opposition. He argues that since Trump has taken both houses of Congress and the Supreme Court, he therefore faces no opposition. This is mistaken and loses sight of the fact that the main game is actually not in Congress or Parliament, where the tools which are tools of capitalist rule, not the actual seat of power. Challenging capitalist power directly was shown by the Boeing workers last October. 33,000 workers were on strike for a month, rejecting a union-recommended offer of a 25% pay rise, went out on strike demanding a 40% pay rise and cost the company $1 billion per month. They voted in November to accept an offer of 38%, and 41% still voted no and wanted to keep fighting. Also in October, 50,000 dock workers on the east coast of the US won a pay increase after just 3 days on strike. This was the first coast-wide strike since 1977, and it completely paralysed shipping. Grassroots trade union members are beginning to look to their own power, especially as the AFL-CIO, the rough equivalent of the ACTU, is only interested in being a cash machine for the Democrats. Networks are emerging, such as the National Labour Network for a Ceasefire and Labour for Palestine, not to be confused with our Labour for Palestine, pushing rank-and-file work to the left. The Palestine movement in the USA, especially the campus occupations, inspired the world, including campus occupations here in Australia. Instead of bending to the disgusting ruling class politics of the Democrats that supports the genocide of the Palestinians and won't stand up to Trump's racism, homophobia and transphobia, these are the small signs that rank-and-file union members are looking for alternatives. Trump's influence is already being felt here in Australia, especially through Dutton. Gina Rinehart has taken out full-page advertisements in US newspapers congratulating Trump on his victory, as has Visy chairman Anthony Pratt. Both of them attended his inauguration. The California fires mean the question of climate will be posed more sharply in the United States, as will the more frequent hurricanes tracking across America's southeast. As people with homes start to be less insured, more will face ruin. We need to recognise as well that vulnerable workers now living in tent cities are most exposed in the USA to these climate risks. The solution in California use 1,800 prisoners, about 30% of the firefighting force, who are being paid between $5.80 and $10.24 per day, instead of the ongoing rate of $74,000 per annum plus benefits. Bear in mind too, the USA imprisons more people than any other nation on earth, and, like Australia, disproportionately targets black and brown communities. This reflects the history of slavery in the United States, which is the root cause of systemic racism, and it is analogous to Australia's dispossession and genocide of First Nations people, underlying the disproportionate number of Aboriginal people in prison in Australia today. Trump will try to stabilise capitalism for the rich by retreating from some confrontations across the world, but ratcheting up confrontation with China through tariffs and a fight over Greenland, which is now important, ironically enough, because climate change has meant that new trade routes are opening up in the Arctic. And he also wants to pick a fight over the Panama Canal, which he sees is run by China simply because they've been paying a lot of money to use the Panama Canal. Both these territories are crucial, or will become crucial, for the flow of international trade. He will continue to attack working class living standards through cuts to taxing the rich and cuts to public services. But he cannot succeed. Capitalism is inherently unstable. All of these strategies have been tried before and failed, leading only to further crises. The open historical question is whether America will now track towards actual fascism. He has, after all, just released 1,500 armed supporters from prison who will now be utterly loyal to him personally. Or will we be able to build a working class movement that resists his attacks, defends services, demands taxing the rich, and unites a diverse working class that frees itself from racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and all other forms of oppression?